Michael Bidwill has chosen radical disruption and culture shifting over experience, and I like it.
You are Locked On Cardinals, your daily Arizona Cardinals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Locked On Cardinals. Alex Clancy here. Follow me on Twitter at Clancy's Corner. Follow the podcast at Locked On AZ Cards. Thank you for making Locked On Cardinals your first listen, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Every day, your team. Bingo, bango, bungo. Today's episode of Locked On Cardinals is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. Ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your football franchise? If so, then this is the game for you. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. Our listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise using promo code LOCKEDON in all caps in the game. So a lot's happened since we've talked last. The Arizona Cardinals now have their offensive and defensive coordinator. And, you know, when seeing this information over the weekend, it just made me think, what is Michael Bidwill thinking? And that's not rhetorical. That's not what is he thinking? It's more like, what were he and Monti Ossenfort's thought processes during this whole process? What was their vision for the future? Was this out of necessity? Was this out of reactionary instead of being proactive? Because maybe Jonathan Gannon wasn't their first choice as head coach. Was Sean Payton their first choice? If so, would they have brought in veteran coordinators? And now that seeing that Jonathan Gannon obviously is the head coach of the Cardinals now, did they choose to shift trajectory? Did they choose to shift action and path? And, you know, I thought about it for a while, and it's the opposite, the antithesis of what would have happened if Sean Payton came in and chose to be the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals. First, the Cardinals would have less draft capital, and they'd most likely have a retread defensive coordinator and offensive coordinator, some guy that Sean Payton knows, likes, has history with. And it would have been more of a older gentleman teaching younger gentlemen how to play this younger gentleman's version of football. And I was like, well, you know what? That's a good checks and balance. It's good because all of these coordinators who would have been hired alongside Sean Payton as head coach would have had history and you know, experience in how to win regardless of the version of football that's being played at any given time. And then I think that's like the personification of the Arizona Cardinals. Old school, no social media. We don't do things in front of the media. We don't have social media spouts, regardless of if our quarterback, you know, scrubs his social media account, blah, 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 blah. Okay. That's the Arizona Cardinals of old. Would have been get experience, like head coaching experience, multiple years, if not decades, of coordinator/coaching experience. And then that was always kind of oil and water with the players. And we saw it myriad times, just the Cardinals living in the Mesozoic era, living in, like, you know, the beginning of football era, when that's not how things are done now. So regardless of how it happened, regardless of how this coaching staff came to be, this is Michael Bidwill's clear choice to change how things have been done. And that's exciting. That's one of the biggest hurdles during any of the conversations that we've had to have, that you and I have had, that I've had with my friends, my coworkers, you know, you've had with your friends. Yeah, this would be great, except it's Steve Keim. Yes, this would be great, except it's the Arizona Cardinals. And that's just conversations that are had around, you know, fans of the Arizona Cardinals. It's so frustrating for people who've been diehards for so long that are like, you know what, next year is going to be different. But all of these things are still in place. That's what's caused all of these things to go wrong in the past, and they're still here. So how can the future be different? That's done. That's done. And that in and of itself is wildly exciting. I'm going to wait to talk about Jonathan Gannon quoting Peter King quoting Jonathan Gannon on Football Morning in America, his publication. I'm going to talk about that tomorrow, okay? Because there's a lot of things that have happened. I want to give it its due time. I'm going to talk about the new coordinators here. I'm going to talk about, what Nick Rallis can bring. I'm going to talk about what Drew Petzing can bring. And it's interesting, from their acute jobs at the other organizations, Hallis with Philly and Petzing with Cleveland, how Michael Bidwill in this journey, including Monti Ossenfort, have pinpointed the clearest of issues this roster has had, whether it be playing, coaching, talent development, etc. And he hit the nail on the head with each one. One, scouting, drafting. Monti Ossenfort, deep-rooted scouting backgrounds. That's one. Number two, with Nick Rallis. He's a linebacker coach, okay, in Philly. Pretty good linebacking crew over there. Comes along with Jonathan Gannon, familiarity, okay? Linebackers. Two, player development. And then number three, with Drew Petzing, it's a quarterback coach in Cleveland. Boom, boom, boom. These are the most important things that need to change in an effort for the Arizona Cardinals to catch up to the rest and become relevant a lot quicker without rushing than people may have thought after the turmoil that's ensued over the last two seasons. He's figured it out. He's diagnosed it. Now, execution is obviously all of this. You can set anybody up for success, but if it's not executed properly, that's it. Michael Bidwill has done his job. And for that, regardless of what happens in the future, he's diagnosed and hired men who he thinks have the skill set necessary to fix the fractured foundation that is the Arizona Cardinals right now. That's what a boss does. Hires people who he thinks can do the job necessary to move the train forward. Because he doesn't know how to coach linebackers, Michael Bidwill. He doesn't know how to coach a quarterback. All good leaders do is put people in positions to succeed in an effort to make the entire entity move forward. And I think Michael Bidwill has done that regardless of age of the men he's hired to coach this organization moving forward. Locked On Cardinals, your daily spot for all Arizona Cardinals information, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Nick Rallis, what does this mean for the Arizona Cardinals moving forward? What does his relationship with Jonathan Gannon mean? What is this going to look like for the defense? And what's the first course of action for Jonathan Gannon and Nick Rallis to take care of on the defensive side of the ball? There are many, but I will talk about what the first one needs to be next. First, there are a lot of people out there, myself included, who think that they could just run an organization from a GM position. And luckily for all, today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. You've heard me talk about this mobile game app, and I can't tell you how much fun I've had, competing against my fellow Locked On NFL host. Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers was our Locked On NFL champion. Well, now it's your turn to compete, but more on that later. You ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your football franchise? Well, your dream can come true, and this game is definitely for you. You'll manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through seasons, and lead your team to glory trying to build a dynasty. With Ultimate Football GM, you're responsible for controlling the destiny of your franchise by hiring the right coaches and coordinators, trading players, navigating your franchise through free agency and the draft, and all the ups and downs of a season. And all this in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline. Play on the go as you want and when you want to. We've created a Locked On NFL League for you to, or a Locked On League, I should say, for you to compete against Locked On fans all over the world. Can you be the ultimate Locked On Football GM? Choose the Locked On League and the app to join. Can you create a football dynasty? Locked On Cardinals listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On, all caps, in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps, so make sure to check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com and look it up on the games on the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. Very exciting times. Very exciting times. The one, major question I have, the one major I don't know. I don't know. Like, it's so hard with Michael Bidwill just to pinpoint reasons. Is he doing things because he thinks this is what other people would do? Is he doing things to completely overcorrect, the overcorrect, the overcorrect, the overcorrect, the overcorrect? That's pretty much what we've seen. It's like it's a seesaw of Bruce Arians to Steve Wilkes to Kliff Kingsbury to Jonathan Gannon. Now, Kliff Kingsbury and Jonathan Gannon aren't necessarily polar opposites, but they're not similar. Like, age, maybe. Like, if you would have told me that Jonathan Gannon's 3 years younger than Kliff, I would have said, hooey fish. To quote my late grandmother. Hooey fish. But this feels different. Just like the last change felt different, just like the last change felt different. But with this one, it's Michael Bidwill had his choose your own adventure. And I wonder if it was due to overcorrection for the reason why he did this, hiring 3 men under the age of 40, or, under the age of 41 to lead this team, or if this was what he and Monti Ossenfort thought was the best course of action moving forward to really streamline the process and get in the Arizona Cardinals into the 21st century, into a situation where they could position themselves not only from a coaching staff, from a personnel standpoint, to be able to play this generation of football in 2023 and kind of right the ship and unfracture the fractured foundation that we've seen over the last handful of years. This is a full-on, flat-out, etch-a-sketch shaking, tabula rasa clean slate from what we've seen. So, optic-wise, regardless of what the national media says, they're going to look at whatever happens with the Cardinals as like, okay, this is weird. So we kind of have to take what the national media says with a pseudo grain of salt, because the Arizona Cardinals right now are an afterthought. They are. That's not to say that midway through 2023 they won't be. That's not to say that through the draft and free agency they won't be, regardless of how long it takes for Kyler Murray to come back. But right now, again, this is a clunky transition, so everything's going to be questioned because it should be. To have that self-understanding as somebody who covers the team, does podcasts, been in radio here for 12 years, covering this team, and for you, the fan, understanding why national media says the things they do is because it's all warranted, all of it. Now it's up to these 3 gentlemen under the age of 41, Monti Ossenfort and Michael Bidwill, obviously, and the players, to change the narrative. But this is how a narrative changes. Doing things differently than you've done in the past. Because remember, the Arizona Cardinals have been the definition of insanity, doing the same thing, expecting different results. This is by far and in no means doing the same thing. Expecting different results, sure, but by no means doing the same thing. Nick Rallis, now the defensive coordinator of the Arizona Cardinals. Okay, he's 29 years old. It's like, well, he's young. He was the linebackers coach over in Philly. he was looked at by multiple teams to take over defensive coordinator or DC roles, or defensive roles with their organization. The Cardinals got him. I saw somebody quote him as the defensive Sean McVay. Okay. What I do know is he took part in spearheading the best defense in the NFL last year. That's what I know. And I know that he was sought after, which is a good thing. I know that the linebackers were great last year numbers-wise. Not to mention Hassan Reddick. Hassan Reddick specifically. But they were great. And on top of this, sure, there is going to be links from former Philadelphia Eagles to the Arizona Cardinals. And however the Cardinals can get players, you take them. James Bradbury is a name that's come out. He's a free agent. I know that he came over from New York. He's a free agent. Okay. I think Brandon Graham's a free agent. Ndamukong Suh. They're just guys that are free agents that may have ties to the Cardinals. But what I do know right now is he's 29 years old, and I'm on board with, and I was like, you know what? Just hire Mike Zimmer. He's a good defensive mind, even though he was kind of pushed out of Minnesota for myriad reasons. But he's not going to be the head coach. It's like a young head coach needs experience around him. And I'm starting to see, not me specifically, but the NFL is starting to see that experience and trust are almost interchangeable at this point. And what Jonathan Gannon has now is trust in both of his coordinators. And that's almost as strong a currency as experience now, because if it works, they're going to grow together. And if it works, it's going to be innovative. And if it works, it's going to have all the old heads looking at it like, there's some catch up that needs to be done here. So when you have Nick Rallis come in, you have him be joined at the hip with Jonathan Gannon, his former DC. They've spent a couple years together already. And all they've done is put together a good defense, and a defense that made the Super Bowl last year. So what's the first thing that Nick Rallis needs to do as defensive coordinator? He needs to sit in a room with Jonathan Gannon and say, okay, who's here for the future? Who's here? Because what we've seen are a lot of ups and downs, injuries, sure, performance, yeah. Byron Murphy is the biggest question mark for me, because when he's been great, he's been CB1. He's been Pro Bowler. It was half of 2 seasons ago and half of last season. Half of 2 seasons ago wasn't as impressive as the first half of last season because there was no pass rush for the Cardinals last season. And Byron Murphy played like a CB1 through the first 5 or 6 weeks, locking down guys like Devontae Adams, etc. But with this, it's not going to be as difficult as if a couple of these guys, were on the rookie scale deals. Like ripping off the Band-Aid here is almost better, because they're going to have to make a decision on Byron Murphy now. They're going to have to make a decision on Zach Allen now. And how this roster is going to be formulated, it needs to have the plan starting now. Like, okay, I'm going to keep these guys, going to draft these positions. Like, that's something that needs to be set. And luckily, what we experienced last year isn't going to happen this year, where they're not going to trade for a wide receiver in the first round instead of drafting an offensive lineman or an edge rusher or a corner. And in the second round, they're probably going to draft a defensive player too, or an offensive lineman. Like, the ushering in of a new regime has clear eyes on exactly what the issues are with this roster. And starting first for Nick Rallis is just having a catalog, an inventory of who's here for the future and who isn't. And the honorable mention will always be, what are you going to do with Isaiah Simmons? Figure it out. Because there's no way that he can leave this organization and become all pro elsewhere. You think Hassan Reddick is scary? Imagine Isaiah Simmons in the right system. Hopefully, this system ushered in right now is going to be the one that's going to yield Isaiah Simmons to stay with the Arizona Cardinals and have the uncomfortable conversation of, how much do you pay this guy and not are you going to pay him or let him walk? Locked On Cardinals, your team every day. Moving to the offensive side of the ball. What does this mean for Drew Petzing coming in? Should we look at what happened in Cleveland last year as a knock on him or as a give him a pass? I'll talk about it next. Locked On Cardinals, your team every day. Alex Clancy here. Follow me on Twitter at Clancy's Corner. Follow the podcast at Locked On AZ Cards. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. You know, with the offense and the offensive coordinator choice, this is the one where it's a little bit more fragile. Because it's Kyler Murray. All right? Like, it's something where everything is hinged upon the progress of Kyler Murray. Now, you hope that he comes back. He only misses a couple games. He looked good during his, his Instagram stories showing, that he was doing some pretty good movement for a guy that just tore his ACL and had reconstructive surgery. But all of this, everything, all of this is predicated upon Kyler Murray. And when I saw that Drew Petzing got brought in, I was like, okay, let me look at Cleveland last year. And I watched Cleveland. It was interesting. I do the Locked On NFL Thursday national show with Tyler Rowland from Locked On Titans. And one of the big conversations we had was about Cleveland because, Deshaun Watson did terrible things or allegedly or whatever. This isn't, And then you see Cleveland just be in games. They were in games for a large portion of the season with Jacoby Brissett. And it made me think, like, now, is that Stefanski? Is that the rush attack? Is that, and yeah, I mean, the answers are all yes with that, but it just shows how impactful play action is. And it shows how impactful a good offensive line is. And it shows how impactful a solid run game is. And when you have Drew Petzing coming in, it's like, it got me excited. It got me excited, especially when Eric Bieniemy went elsewhere. And, I thought when Eric Bieniemy went to Washington, I'm like, okay, he has higher aspirations and could be taken over for Ron Rivera. Who knows? In Washington. But it would have been one of those arranged marriages, like Mike Zimmer, if he were to come in and be DC. And the obvious thought process from Michael Bidwill and Monti Ossenfort was, we're going to get some trust between the coordinators and the head coach. And they're going to have history. Both Gannon and Petzing were in Minnesota together. So they've all got history, all three of these guys. And it made me think this offense is going to look very different next year. That's the first thing it made me think. And the second thing it made me think was, they're going to spend some money on a running back. Not number 3 overall Bijan Robinson. They're probably going to draft a running back. They've got Keontae Ingram, who showed flashes last season, like an Isaiah Pacheco light, very, very light, but Isaiah Pacheco light. They got James Conner, but you need to have at least one, if not two more running backs brought in. Because if you told me that the Cardinals were top 8 in rushing next year with Kyler Murray still getting paid all that money, cool. Who cares? It doesn't matter. As long as the offense works, it works. And if you're going to infuse, spoiler alert, quarterback under center from the conversation that Jonathan Gannon had with Peter King from Football Morning in America, which I'm going to start tomorrow's podcast with, the offense is going to look vastly different. And that's great. Excitement of the unknown is what people should feel moving forward, especially with the offense. Excitement of the unknown. So, all in all, with both of these young gentlemen coming in to be coordinators for the first time, it's not like they're like Jason Kidd or Steve Nash or guys that have just come off the field. They're like, okay, here's a coordinator role. The guys have busted their asses. They haven't been coordinators, but they've had integral parts in growing organizations on opposite sides of the ball. So I think that at this point, as I've said about Michael Bidwill, you just need to trust him because you have to implicitly trust him because you don't have a choice. It's the same thing. Just because they're young doesn't mean they're not fit for this job. And I feel like in this transitionary phase, in this clunky 13-year-old wearing braces phase the Arizona Cardinals are in right now, trying something new like other organizations have and it's worked is, I think, something that will not only help the Cardinals' culture, image, foundation, but also put them in a position to reach heights that they've never reached before as an organization. And that sounds so dumb. It sounds so blanket, but it's true. It's like the Arizona Cardinals 2.0. If I told you 15 years ago this was going to happen, you would have said, Nana, hooey fish. It's here. It's exciting. And I'll tell you what, it couldn't be worse than what we've experienced. That's something really to keep in mind. Alex Lancey, Locked on Cardinals. I will go deep into Peter King's Football Morning in America, highlighting Jonathan Gannon tomorrow. Talk to you then.